Oh no, I'm making a controversial video. Hey YouTube, it's me, and I'm assuming you're wondering exactly who me is, and I'm going to explain it to you. My name is Jay, and I like a lot of things. Food, air, technology, you know, life stuff. But I also love things like history, geopolitics, and domestic affairs, which is what I made this YouTube channel for, with the topic of today's video being, why the Ukrainian conflict could cause World War III. Yep, you heard me right. I am such a ray of positivity and sunshine. Now, the chances are if you're an American watching this video, you're probably thinking one of two things. Why is this dude taking so long to start the video? I want to hear political things, not about you. Secondly, what the fuck is the Ukraine? And I'm going to explain those things, so shh. For those of you who don't know, Ukraine is a nation of around 44 million people located in the eastern half of the European continent. The capital and largest city of the nation is Kiev, numbering nearly 2.7 million people. And for reference, that's about the size of the American city of Chicago, you know, just without the gang violence. Or at least unorganized gang violence. Now, even though you may not know much about the Ukraine, you've probably at least heard of these things currently and formerly affiliated with the nation. You know, fun things like Chernobyl, the Soviet Union, civil unrest, far-right nationalism, and civil war. So let's give some context into the history of the nation. Ukraine was once a part of what was essentially a country of countries formerly known as the Soviet Union. In 1991, which for reference was 30 years ago, Ukraine was one of the countries that came out of the rotten carcass that was the Soviet Empire along with Russia. Russia, which later became the successor state to the Soviet Union, attempted to make better ties with the United States and NATO, even electing Boris Yeltsin, who was seen in a positive light when it came to making better ties with the West. However, many Russians viewed him as weak, primarily because of his drunkenness and being perceived as being too friendly towards the West. During this time, the United States allegedly promised not to expand NATO, which at the time wasn't directly on Russia's doorstep. I say allegedly because this claim is disputed and there wasn't any paper documentation of the agreement. So, you know, come to your own conclusions about that. NATO did, however, push farther east, with the Baltic states, which were also former Soviet socialist republics, being the most recent additions into the alliance. This meant that if a war were to break out between Russia and the West, NATO would be able to instantly threaten the city of St. Petersburg, which is one of Russia's most strategically and culturally important cities. So this is where Ukraine comes into play. With the collapse of the USSR in 1991 and the formation of the EU nearly 2 years later, many formerly Eastern Bloc countries opted to join either the EU or NATO while Ukraine sat back, primarily because of a deep split among the west and the east of the nation. To oversimplify the situation on the ground, the eastern half of Ukraine wanted better ties with Russia. This is due to many factors, one of the major ones being that there are many Russians and Russian speakers in the eastern half of Ukraine, and the mostly Ukrainian West wanted to further integrate with the EU and NATO. This all came to a head at the end of 2013, when Ukrainian protesters demanded an end to the pro-Russian government, which later turned into the Revolution of Dignity, which began on February 18th and ended on March 23rd. During this period of instability, Russian troops moved into the Crimean Peninsula, primarily because the Russian government had to deal with Ukraine to use the port for strategic purposes. Given the large amount of ethnic Russians in the area mixed with the instability in Ukraine, the Russian government decided to annex Crimea because a Ukraine friendly towards the West could and likely would end Russia's use of the port, which would devastate the Russian Navy. Another important thing to note is that Crimea did not always belong to the Ukraine. In fact, it was given to Ukraine in 1954 during the Soviet years. Why? Well, because Kiev was the closest central authority nearby, so strategically it made sense at the time. Russia understandably felt as though it had the right to take the port back and seize the moment. This move aggravated many Western leaders, who later began sanctioning the Russian Federation for its hostile actions against the Ukraine. Later, we saw an uprising in the eastern half of Ukraine when Russian-backed separatists took control of the cities of Luhansk and Donetsk near the border regions of Russia. With the West obviously being against these actions, many nations, including the United States, began supplying Ukrainian militias to fight the Russians in the east, even going as far as to offer ground training to Ukrainian forces. Now, with Kiev pushing for further integration with the West to draw in assistance from Washington and Brussels, and Moscow refusing to relent due to its internal and domestic affairs and the effects of the sanctions, the conflict seems to have no end in sight, and in fact has turned into yet another flashpoint for a potential third global conflict. Now, with that being said, you have definitely been left with more questions than answers, including but not limited to, what does the West intend to do given the situation on the ground in the Ukraine? What is Russia's issue with Ukraine joining the European Union and the West? Why is Crimea and Eastern separatist movements in the Ukraine so important to Moscow? And why does Russia need to expand when it has more land area than the entire surface area of fucking Pluto? Well, that will require us to talk about the situation in the Russian Federation and the internal crisis the media doesn't talk about. However, in my next video, I do intend to talk about it, and you can be one of the first to see it next week by subscribing to my YouTube channel and clicking the bell icon to be notified when I upload. So thank you guys for watching. Please be sure to like the video and comment. It helps in the algorithm a lot, and take care.